So today we're going to do a discourse on the teaching of the Buddha. So in the beginning of this kind of gathering for teaching, we usually recite the prayer called the Three Continuum, and then the Heart Sutra. So with regard to the first, it's maybe there are a few differences in the wordings, but this also the prayer of the Three Continuums is also there in the Pali tradition, and the Heart Sutra is in the Sanskrit tradition. And then, so we also say the prayer, which is the we also say the two verses of salutation from Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Nagarjuna, which praises the Buddha from the point of view of having taught dependent origination. Recently we had a meeting, a conference between the Tibetan Buddhist tradition followers and also the Theravada tradition followers. So I told them that I don't like formality, but I have a question. The Buddha has taught, given his teaching, and it's been 2,600 years since he gave his teaching, and I asked them whether his teaching is relevant to this world today in the 21st century, or is it needed in this century? So of course things change, clothes and other material things do change. In the past, we used for transportation horse and mules and so forth, whereas today we use vehicles, these motor vehicles. So the things have changed. So I was asking them whether the teaching of the Buddha that was taught over 2,600 years ago is relevant today or not. So we need to ask this question. I told them that otherwise we are actually following the teaching of the Buddha as if it's a custom and like a customary habit, and people don't really pay much attention to the teaching. So I said, if it's relevant in today's world, in the 21st century, then we must pay attention to it. So I said this to the Theravada monks at the meeting. So here, first question that I would like to raise is whether religion is something which is beneficial in today's world or not. Of course, all the religious traditions, Judaism and so forth, which believe in a creator God, of course they have lived for over 1,000 years now. But even today, many people, millions of people are following these religions, and they benefit from it. I have a Christian friend who came to me, and we had a discussion, and he recited some hymn to the God. It's a praise to God with a simple musical instrument, and while he recited the hymn, sang the hymn, he was in tears, he shed tears, and then I think I mentioned it before too. I mentioned about this Christian monk who lived as a hermit for 5 years. And so he had a very strong peace, experience of peace. within himself. And then Mother Teresa, the late Mother Teresa, was a Christian practitioner. So we cannot, of course, say that she had Bodhichitta or anything like that. Maybe she doesn't have that intention to become a fully enlightened being, a Buddha, for the benefit of all sentient beings, using her intelligence. But she had been really helpful and beneficial to many, many people. I admire her. While she was living, I once met her somewhere in Italy or somewhere, but never met her in her Sisters of Charity home in Calcutta. So one time I visited her charity organization, but I told them that I have come here without your invitation. But Mother Teresa, the late Mother Teresa, was someone who was altruistic and gave service to others, which I praise and honor and admire. And therefore I came to visit you, I told them. Though she was no more at that time, her followers the Sisters of Charity were doing very well in terms of serving others. So all religious traditions which teach love and compassion do serve others, to benefit others. So the religions are relevant and needed even today. And so when human beings face difficulties and there is no other means to overcome them, then keeping faith in God keeps our hope alive. Otherwise, having used all kinds of means that are available to human beings, when you don't have such a belief in a religion, then people become hopeless. And so the teaching of love, compassion, tolerance, and contentment and so forth are common in all the religious traditions, though their reasons for these practices may be different. In Buddhism, whether it's Pali tradition, which of course teaches all the Four Noble Truths and their 16 attributes, and we give reason to believe in these teachings of the Four Noble Truths and the 16 attributes, which with reasons like all compounded phenomena are impermanent, all contaminated things are in the nature of suffering or source of suffering, and nirvana is peace. All phenomena are empty and selfless, are taught in the Pali tradition as well. And especially the Buddha, after turning the wheel of Dharma on the Four Noble Truths, he also turned the wheel of Dharma called the characterlessness. The wheel of Dharma without characteristics. And so he taught the perfection of wisdom, and these were studied and taught in the Nalanda tradition. And so not only resorting to the scriptural authority, but using reasoning. So as I said yesterday also, if some of the words of the Buddha goes against reason, and the Sanskrit tradition did not accept them literally, but said that these such and such teachings were taught for certain purpose and reason by the Buddha, and if you actually accept them literally, then there are what kind of logical fallacies actually befall you are all analyzed. And so the Sanskrit tradition mainly emphasizes logic and reason to explain the teaching of the Buddha, and therefore writings of Master Nagarjuna and his disciples and followers used the reason. And then there is the text on logic and epistemology written by Dignaka and Dharmakirti as well. And therefore, as Sanskrit tradition emphasized logic, therefore, even today, when people do investigation into the material things in science, modern science, I mean, they are able to explain many things which we do not know, and so they have evidence and so through their investigation, what happens is they also come to accept things which are more obscure and hidden from us, which are not accessible through the perceptions, but using inferential cognition and reason. And so this is the using logic and reasoning to check into the teaching of the Buddha and the reality of things, nature of things, is there in the Sanskrit tradition, which has come down to us through in the Nalanda tradition. And so Nalanda tradition particularly emphasizes using reason and logic to delve into the nature of things. So the logic, as I said yesterday, logic and epistemology are something which are also helpful to non-believers as well. So in this 21st century, the Buddhism is very necessary and relevant today, in today's 21st century world. So the Nalanda masters, the 17 Nalanda masters, in the past we used to invoke what were known as the 2 ornaments and the 6 ornaments and 2 sublime masters, and I found that was not enough. Therefore I added on top of these 8 masters 9 more masters from the Nalanda tradition, making up 17 Nalanda masters, and written a prayer to them. So in order to transform ourselves to the practice of the Dharma, even for that, in the teaching of the Buddha, we use logic. Whether you are able to discipline your mind or not is you should know what are you should understand psychology and the system of mind and emotions. Earlier you debated about mind, mental factors, the 6 root afflictions, and 20 secondary afflictions, mental afflictions, and so forth. Of course, these also are part of our mind, which comes through, which arise through causes and conditions, and because they are produced through their causes and conditions, therefore they are impermanent, changing moment by moment, and therefore we should check into the nature of these states of mind, such as anger. We should see what are the pros and cons of the anger, what benefit it has and what harm it does to us. If you want to fight with somebody or quarrel with somebody without anger, but if you keep yourself calm and smiling, and then try to face the challenge, perhaps you would do it better So even if you want to do something bad to somebody, if you do it without anger but gently and skillfully, it will be really. So there was once an official, Tibetan government official, when he got angry, people used to say that he actually smiles and says, "Oh, how come that is?" and so forth. And people knew that he was actually angry at that time. So what people usually do is get angry and then fight with others. But even if you want to do something bad, but if you do it without anger, but very gently. And so, in other words, anger doesn't have any good quality as such. It disturbs our physical health, it disturbs peace of mind, it disturbs friendliness, and also your family, communities, and the entire world. So we need to reduce anger. And in order to do that, we should understand that anger comes through causes and conditions. It will not go away through prayer. Therefore, you need to look into the cause of anger, which is that of irritation, frustration, and that in turn is rooted in some form of improper rumination. And that in turn is rooted in that of the grasping at some true independent existence in things. Therefore, in Buddhism, there's the teaching of emptiness. They're saying that there is all phenomena are empty and selfless, and this is really powerful antidote to this deep misunderstanding. All the four philosophical schools of Buddhism do teach the selflessness and emptiness, but it is only mainly in the Madhyamaka treatises that this is the precise nature of this ignorance is explained. So when you do check into the things which are obvious to us, there's nothing that can be pointed to as we can point our finger at and say that this is this and this is that and so forth. Nothing can be posited objectively, as the quantum physicists also say that there is nothing objectively existing. And so what the quantum physicists say and the Chittamantras say, by saying that the object and the perceiver of the object, for example, the blue color and the perceiver of blue color, arise simultaneously. Therefore, they say there is no externality to the blue color as such, and blue actually exists as the reflection of the imprint left on our mind in the past. And therefore, they say that the object and the subject are devoid of duality in terms of dual substance. So the Chittamantras say that because they do say that things have some objective existence, yet when they actually want to point to something existing, for example, a form or something, they cannot pinpoint anything as being within that object, and therefore they say the form and so forth does not have any external existence. And so they're similar to the Chittamatra view, saying that things do not exist externally. The quantum physicists also say there is no objective existence. And then with regards to the mind, of course in the past, the scientists, modern scientists have said that the mind is no other than the brain. But later on, in the later part of the 20th century and now, there are scientists who do kind of have an idea that there is something other than the brain which can actually impact the brain itself. And so basically, of course, we have misunderstandings, misconceptions of the reality of things. On top of that, because of certain ideology, whether it's scientists or somebody else, I mean, we could also have a quiet kind of a misunderstanding or misconception of the reality as well that comes through their own belief system. So I asked one scientist that physically you are very calm and composed, and without any external stimulus, but just the fact that some kind of thought process goes on in your mind, and that actually disturbs your mind and then your body as well. Isn't that possible? And I asked, and this scientist said, it seems to be true, but that cannot be true. So today, some scientists, when they experiment some meditators who do some meditation using their mind, and they see that there is, without letting the mind go astray due to excitation and also mental laxity, just keeping calm and using the mind in meditation, they see some kind of impact that is called from the mind on the brain as well. So in Pramanavartika Karika, in the Dharmakirti, it mentions that the non-Buddhists say that the mind is a product of the body, I mean, which is quite a rough idea, whereas what the scientists are saying today seems to be more subtle explanation of the brain called being. The course of mind. So, of course, in the traditional text, we could say that the non-Buddhist positions could be rejected and refuted through reason, but it's more difficult to reject what the scientists have to explain. When they explain the sensorial perceptions, they explain it on the basis of the prefrontal context or something, and then there is also so there is a part of the brain which actually moves or has movement when someone is compassionate, as well as when someone becomes angry. And so the same part of the brain is moved, or when you have these two completely different emotions, and therefore I told the scientists that in that case the brain seems to be quite foolish. So we should also study what the scientists have to say when they explain mind on the basis of the brain. Different parts of the brain have different functions, and then use them in your investigation, in your study of Pramanavartika Karika. So over 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, I have suggested that the monastic institutions would be good for them to start teaching science to their monks, and therefore in Depung Seling and other monasteries, they have even set up science labs and teach science to their monastics. So there is this new ideas that come from science, modern science, which were not there in the past. So it would be also good to write articles and essays and so forth by learning science and then comparing it with our tradition. So I usually say that I am like the master of all, jack of all trades, master of none. I can say things, but if you push me further, I may not have answer to all the questions. So today, religion in general, and in particular Buddhism, and particularly the Nalanda tradition, is something that people consider that they could draw knowledge and wisdom from in today's world. So since we have such an opportunity, the materials are there, but we need to use them not through, which cannot be done through prayer alone, but through study and investigation. So the monasteries and nunneries, and especially in the past, monasteries and nunneries, many of them did not have the tradition of learning philosophy and logic and so forth, and they were mostly concerned with rituals and prayers and building mandalas, sand mandalas, and doing the rituals according to them, and based on them and so forth. But there was no kind of role model for them to do philosophical study through logic. In the 1960s and 70s, I have urged the monasteries and nunneries, the monasteries to have the study of philosophy, and then also nunneries should also do so. And therefore, now we have some results of what I have urged people to do, and they have practiced it. And even lay people have now started studying debate and philosophy and logic. So for the lay people, taking interest in that, the fact that you have grown interest in the study of philosophy and logic is very good, and you should continue to do so. When I was in South India, in monastic institutions of learning, I have said that in the commentary called Sfutarth, the clear meaning of or the by Haribhadra, which is a commentary on Abhisamayalamkara, he mentions that there are two types of followers of the Buddha. One who follows mainly on faith, and they are called the and the other who mainly follow on the basis of reason. And he talks about the growing and actually faith in the three what are known as the three mothers, producing the three types of Arya beings. In order to gain faith in such a process of bringing about an Arya being through the three mothers or the three realizations, and the ones who follow reason, the ones with the sharper faculty, use reason and not just faith. Whereas there are those who use, who actually draw or develop faith without any reason, and they are called the ones with duller faculty. So even if it may be someone who criticizes the religion and have no belief in religion, and if you are able to explain the teaching of the Buddha by first introducing the teaching, And so, after being introduced to the teaching of the Buddha and understanding the teaching of the Buddha well, then you should go about with practice on the basis of the faith, drawn through reason. And then when you introduce the teaching of the Buddha, it should be done on the basis of what is said in Abhisamaya Alamkara, which begins, in which you come across the teaching on what are known as the 10 instructions, and the instructions consist of the instruction on the two truths and the nature of the two truths, and then the four truths, and then those of the three jewels. And so, of course, even the non-Buddhist traditions of India do talk about two truths, which are conventional and ultimate truths. So, on the basis of the two truths, the reality at the ground level of the things, you should draw understanding of the Four Noble Truths. And by understanding the Four Noble Truths, you actually come to understand that of the true cessation. Not only following it verbally, saying this is the true cessation, just verbalizing it, but what it means. What does cessation mean? What is ceased? And what is attained through that cessation of certain defilements? You should understand that these mental afflictions, the destructive emotions, have a powerful antidote against them, whereas they do not have any sound basis and support from knowledge as such, as well as understanding that the basic nature of mind is clear light, luminous, and that and so, when you talk about the lack of a true existence, you'll be able to draw the understanding that nothing whatever has any sound ground or basis So you draw understanding through these kind of logic, and also develop some kind of experience of the teaching of the true cessation. And then you'll be able to say if there are the cases where certain form of negative or mental afflictions can be overcome, then it could be possible also for all of the mental afflictions to be eradicated from our mind stream. So all the different mental faults are rooted in the mental afflictions, the kleshas, or destructive emotions, and so forth, and they in turn are rooted in this misconception of reality, which has its antidote, which is the understanding the true nature of things. And therefore, the true truths are the basis, based on which we can explain the Four Noble Truths. And within the explanation of the Four Noble Truths, we can actually understand what is meant by the liberation, nirvana. And then we can also see the Buddha as this teacher who teaches us this. On the basis of his realization of the entire objects of knowledge. And therefore we can see Buddhahood is possible. And the one who has actually reached the stage where they have overcome mental afflictions from their mind are called Sangha, through the path of the true path. So mainly by getting introduced to and getting an insight into the true Dharma, you are able to see that of the Sangha and that of the Buddhahood. Buddhahood is that stage where someone has overcome all mental defilements from their mind stream. So that was about the introduction to the teaching of the Buddha. So in this text, there's also a text on exchanging and equaling, exchanging self and others. Which is always asking if it was drawn from the liberation in the palm of your hand by Pabongkapa. So with regard to this generation of the Bodhichitta in the concealed manner, I received it from Jabjit Rinpoche on the basis of the offering to Guru, which goes through the equaling oneself and others from a conventional point of view and ultimate point of view. And within the first, there are those related to oneself, 3 related to oneself and 3 related to others. And then the And so, having received the bodhicitta, generation of bodhicitta in the concealed manner, you need to actually reflect on it on a daily basis. And so in the offering to the Guru, there is this verse where it says, I feel delighted when others have happiness, and so forth. And on the basis of that, the 9 rounds of meditation on equaling and exchanging self and others come from there. So Master Tsongkhapa is praised as the crowning jewel of the scholars of Tibet, the land of snows, Tibet, and so he was truly an excellent of Tibet. So we also have this prayer of which invokes the auspiciousness on the basis of the 3 masters, Rendawa, the Lotsawa, Lodin Sherab, Rendawa, and then Master Tsongkhapa. And so Master Tsongkhapa was someone who was actually very extensively learned, and then also practiced the Dharma day and night. And so in his praise to the destiny fulfilled, Tsongkhapa says that one should not be satisfied with partial knowledge of the Buddha Dharma, but that one should study all the teachings, the entire teaching of the Buddha. And so when he explains Abhisamaya Alamkara in his garland or golden rosary, he actually has, it shows that he has actually read the 21 Indian commentaries to Abhisamaya Alamkara, and he draws from those 21 and compare those Indian commentaries, and by comparing and contrasting them, and then he draws his own insight or writes his own insight. So it would be it is quite befitting for me to give praise to Tsongkhapa, because Tsongkhapa was from Amdo region of Tibet, and I also was from Amdo region of Tibet. So I usually say that I have some kind of a form of attachment to Rinpoche being from Amdo. The fact that we were both from the same homeland. So it is quite, he deserves this praise from me as well. So it's not just, not surprising to say that Rinpoche has his two main disciples, Khedrubje and Gyaltsabje, and also that he has written 18 volumes of his writings. Just because there are that many number of volumes of his texts, doesn't make him something special. But because there are Tibetan masters who have written more number of volumes of texts. But if you look at the writing, you have to actually judge the greatness of the person from their writing, and the depth and the profundity and the vastness of the teaching that are given in their writings. Gyaltsabje Rinpoche used to tell me that in order to understand the Madhyamaka philosophical view of Master Tsongkhapa, one needs to read the 5 texts written by Tsongkhapa on Madhyamaka philosophy. So what we come to understand, according to the Madhyamaka philosophy, is that things are merely conventionally nominal. Merely nominal. And Rinpoche says, things either could exist from their own side, or they could exist by way of our conceptual designation. Since the first position can be refuted through reason and logic, there's no other choice but to say that things exist by way of designation, and therefore one should actually direct one's mind towards that. That seems to be rather a desperate statement. So we need to understand that things can exist merely by way of convention, that by renown and convention in the world. And so, if you look at the writings of Tsongkhapa and read other texts as well and compare it with his writings, then you'll see the specialty and the profundity of his understanding and insight. I saw one commentary on a commentary by Nagarjuna's text on Goyasamaja Tantra by Budun Thamje Khenpa, the omniscient Budun Rinpoche, and it didn't give me much insight, except that he was paraphrasing the Nagarjuna's text. So I really felt kind of discouraged to read. Whereas if you read Tsongkhapa's writings, you will see that he deals with the difficult points in the different Indian classical texts, where there are certain parts which deals with the difficult points. He actually writes on those difficult points more and more extensively. Whereas some other writings of masters, if you read them, you'll see that when it comes to difficult points, they actually write very briefly on them. So, for example, Master Tsongkhapa writes in his great treatise of the path, the stages of the path to enlightenment, says that the teaching of the Four Noble Truths shows. It's like the big framework of the entire teaching of the Buddha, and therefore, accordingly, one should lead one's disciples on the path to enlightenment, to the teaching of the Buddha. So if Je Rinpoche were to write his own style of writing Lamrim, the stages of the path, the genre of text called Stages of the Path to Enlightenment, he may have written it beginning with the teaching on the Four Noble Truths and expanding on that, on the different paths pertaining to the three types of beings and so forth. Whereas his writing on the stages of the path are based on the other Kadamba masters' writings, and therefore that is not what he had done. So if you look at the writing of Kedrup Rinpoche, one of the main disciples of Je Tsongkhapa, for example, I recently read his commentary on Pramanavartika Karika by Dharmakirti. He raises some points that he wishes to, it's like the standpoint of other scholars, and then when he actually criticizes them, he uses certain bad language, which I found not to be quite right to do. And whereas in Je Tsongkhapa's writings, you will not find such bad language used against others when criticizing their position and assertions. There was one master named Jamyang Yishi. So when he debated, he had a very special physical expression as well. And he sometimes is quite exaggerating things. And he says that any Tibetan scholar must be from Amdo region. And that's not the case, actually, because we have Gyaltsab Je and Kedrup Je and Putun and so forth. And so that was quite a big mouth on his part to say that any Tibetan scholar must be from Amdo. So in today's time, most of the writings on Tibetan on Tibetan subjects, Tibetan logic and so forth, written in Tibetan have come from Amdo region. So Je Rinpoche, in the later part of his life, he wrote a letter to Tsago Ompo Ngawan Thakpa. So Tsago Ompo Ngawan Thakpa was told by Je Rinpoche, Tsongkhapa, that he would be able to serve better in the eastern part of Tibet, and therefore he went to Gyaltsab part of Tibet. And so from there he wrote a letter requesting him to give some spiritual instruction. And Tsago Ompo Ngawan Thakpa was one of the chief disciples, hard disciples of Je Rinpoche himself. And this is regarding this in one of the miscellaneous writings of Tsongkhapa. He says that Tsongkhapa says that when he becomes a Buddha, he would actually share the first teaching with him, Tsago Ompo Ngawan Thakpa, at that time. Tsongkhapa says that. So Ngawan Thakpa requested spiritual instruction in a letter to Je Tsongkhapa, and Je Rinpoche wrote this text: homage to the precious noble masters, the very essence of all the Buddha's teachings, the path that is praised by noble bodhisattvas, and the entrance of all fortunate ones desiring liberation. To the best of my ability, I shall now set forth. So by saying to the best of my ability, I'll set forth this teaching. He's saying that he will give a very comprehensive teaching. You who are unattached to samsara's pleasures. It's on page 68 in English. Please look at the book. So in each of these three principal aspects of the path, so there is you who are attached to samsara's pleasures and strive. So this verse shows that of the reason why one should develop renunciation or this wish to be free, the determination to be free from samsara. So the real determination to be free should be developed on the basis of understanding suffering. That is, as long as you have this kind of contaminated aggregates, the psychophysical aggregates, which has come through karma and afflictions, they are under the influence of these two. And therefore, when you really reflect on the fact that this kind of body and mind that we have now are under the influence of our karma and delusions, then you feel that there's no way other than overcoming this, the afflictive emotions and karma. And so, thinking of this kind of pervasive suffering, existential suffering, one should actually draw renunciation, develop renunciation to suffering. So the true cessation, which is not the result of one's karma and delusions, that is the true cessation. And so we should have this, having this aspiration to reach that kind of liberation is what is known as that of true renunciation. So whilst lacking the pure renunciation, there is no way to pacify the continual thirst for pleasure in the ocean of samsara. So without really understanding that the psychophysical aggregates which are brought about, these uncontaminated psychophysical aggregates that we have, without seeing this as this nature of suffering, you will not have a true renunciation or this the determination to be free from samsara. And so, with regard to mental afflictions, when we just using the term mental affliction is, of course, the term itself is quite inauspicious, and so with regard to suffering, even the kind of unwanted experiences that even the animals are aware of are the gross form of suffering. Whereas if you are able to reflect on the deeper form of suffering, which is these psychophysical aggregates which are contaminated, which have come about through causes and condition, the very fact that they have come into existence shows that they are subject to change, and therefore when you relate this reason to the psychophysical aggregates, the cause that have brought about this kind of contaminated psychophysical aggregates are those of the delusion and karma. So it says, and since all living beings are bound by their craving for existence, they must begin by finding the determination to be free. So this shows that we should cultivate and develop the determination to be free from samsara. And freedom and advantages are rare, and there's no time to waste. Reflect on this again and again and yet again. And dispel attachment, this life, and so forth. And so you should reflect on the preciousness of this kind of human life that we have found now. If you had been born in animal or unfortunate realms, and you will not have the opportunity to even listen or hear the teaching. And so you should be able to realize that with this kind of human birth, you have actually the opportunity to listen to the teaching, and you have the opportunity to create causes for higher rebirth in the next lives, the complete cause for higher rebirth. So without this intelligence, we will not have the faculty to discern what is right and wrong, and therefore you will not also be able to reflect on the teaching of selflessness. And so this kind of life is very meaningful. It has great benefit. So this kind of life cannot come from just one cause, but many different factors come together, and you should reflect, therefore, on the difficulty of finding such precious human life. So from the point of view of causal point of view, this kind of life is rare to find. So with regards to using analogies, of course there in the classical text there are analogies given like comparing this human life with the number of the animals, insects and so forth, and compared to them the human number is very less, but I have not much kind of appreciation for that kind of point. So even the non-Buddhist traditions like Christianity and other Indian non-Buddhist spiritual traditions have the causes for oneself to be born, to reborn, to take rebirth as in the higher realms of existence, although they do not talk in their own traditions as such. So there are two goals that we need to achieve. One is higher rebirth in the next rebirth, and the other is liberation, which is called definite goodness as well. So without attaining the first, that is the higher rebirth, there is no way one can attain nirvana, that definite goodness. So our main aim is to reach nirvana or liberation, and for that reason, we need to create the causes for the higher rebirths, so that we could attain or obtain rebirth through continuously, life after life. And so there are the 16 factors mentioned for higher rebirth, the 10 virtuous or wholesome actions, and avoiding harming others through deception and so forth. and also sincerely helping people who are old and sick and so forth, not looking for any reward for your action, this kind of altruistic action. If you serve them with such a genuine sincerity of the heart, that is a real Dharma practice. And then not drinking alcohol and giving things respectfully. When you give something to poor people, I mean, you should not look down upon them, thinking that you are higher than them. But you should think that they are the ones, like the field for your cultivation of virtue and wholesome. And so, in other words, in the Ratnavali, the precious garland by Nagarjuna, there are 16 factors mentioned for higher rebirth. And then he also teaches the emptiness to reach the definite goodness. In the 400 verses, it mentions that the non-meritorious actions should be averted first, and then in the middle, one should get rid of the grasping at self, at the view of self, and then finally, one should overcome all distorted views. And so the second line shows that of developing through reflection, selflessness, through first learning, called studying and listening to the teaching, and then giving thought to it by reflecting on the teaching, which gives rise to conviction in you in this teaching on selflessness. And then when you continue practicing what you are convinced of with regard to that, and then slowly, gradually, as days, weeks, months, years pass by, you will be able to develop some experience of selflessness. And then the third line says that in order to not just overcome the mental afflictions, but even their residual imprints. To overcome even the residual imprints, you should complement this meditation on emptiness or selflessness with, complemented it by that of Bodhichitta, this altruistic spirit of enlightenment. So without that bodhicitta, your understanding and insight into emptiness does not become the antidote to this obscuration to knowledge. Whereas when you meditate on emptiness with the help of bodhicitta to reach the full enlightenment of Buddhahood, then your meditation on emptiness is meditation on emptiness with a full purpose, complete purpose. So, one who is able to do that is a wise one, it says in the 400 verses. So, you should meditate on the impermanence of life and see that one is going to die, and there's no certainty to the time when one is going to die. Although you may think that you will live for 100 years, you may, to a certain degree, kind of approximately say that you will not die tonight, but you have no 100% guarantee or confidence that you will not die this night. And so this shows that the time of death is uncertain. Though it's inevitable that you will die. And when you die, your body, your resources, wealth, your friends, relatives, and so forth, your fame, none of this will be of help to you. You alone, your mind on which you have left the imprints of black or white karma. According to these black or white karma, whichever is greater and powerful, you will follow into the next life. So at the time of death, what actually helps you is the wholesome actions of which you have left imprint on your mind will be helpful to you, but nothing else. So as you die, if you have a very strong imprint of wholesome actions or karma, the Buddha himself has said that not committing any unwholesome actions, cultivating a wealth of virtue, and thoroughly pacifying or taming your mind, this is the teaching of the Buddha. And so the term for dharma or for spirituality or religion in Sanskrit is dharma, which means holding you up, whereas in the Tibetan translation of the word dharma, in this sense, it's che, which means it's a corrective measure. And so what that means is, although your mind at this stage may be full of negative emotions, the destructive emotions, yet you can change that, and you can actually develop the antidote to these destructive emotions, thereby overcoming them through these means. So, of course, we talk about past and future lives. The non-Buddhist says, the non-Buddhist traditions say that the self that comes from the past life to this life and that goes from here to the next life is permanent, single, and autonomous. And so they have said this through reflection on what the self is. So as I said yesterday, it would be better to explain past and future lives on this kind of assertion. So this body does not go from this life to the next life. Everybody knows it. And this brain too. Whereas regarding the mind, there is a waking state mind, the dreaming state mind, and then deep sleep state mind. So during the dream and deep sleep states of mind, of course, there still is the mental consciousness. As I explained yesterday, we still have memories from these experiences. So with regard to the degrees of subtlety of mind, we also know that from our own experience on a daily basis, with regard to, in relation to, and from this waking state mind being gross and so forth. But today, there are cases where people are said to stay in some meditative equipoise even after clinical death. For example, my own late senior tutor, after clinical death, he stayed in that state of meditative equipoise for 13 days. And similarly, one of the former Golden Throne holders, Venerable Lobsang Nyima Rinpoche, also stayed in that state for about 20 days or so. And then one Kagyu master whom I knew lived nearby the Changnam-cho in Tibet. Who was very weak while he was alive, and after his clinical death, his body became very fresh and looked and even the very weak body while alive became rejuvenated self. And so for about 2 or 3 weeks he stayed in that state of meditation. And so, therefore, amongst the scientists, there are people like Richard Davidson, who has started some kind of an investigation into this phenomena called Thukdam. So he lives nearby where the late Geshe Sörbala, Lindrup Sörba, passed away in his Deer Park Dharma Center. And so he visited Geshe Sörbala after he was clinically dead. And so Richie Davidson found that his body looked very fresh, and that gave him a special kind of experience or inspiration. So we do not know which person would stay in that kind of meditative equipoise. In Dharamsala, one elderly man who was married and then became a monk stayed in this state of what is known as Thukdam, the meditative equipoise, in Dharamsala recently. And so nobody really had expected that he would stay in this kind of meditation. So Ling Rinpoche, my senior tutor, stayed in the 13 days in this meditative equipoise. Tubden. Gen Tubden. Gen Tubden. Tubden la. Tubden. So in New Zealand also there was a Tibetan master who lived in, I think, Dunedin or something, some place. And when I reached the Christchurch in New Zealand, it had been 2 days or so since he had clinically died. And so here we have many students of philosophy, the monks, among the monks. And so on the 3rd day or so after his clinical death, on the 3rd night, it was told to me that he had actually, it was seen that he had moved his hands so that the ring finger of the right hand was actually held with the left hand. So his disciple Lagun Rinpoche actually reported this to me, and I told him how unfortunate that you didn't know how it had moved. The hand had moved. I mean, if you could have actually put a camera in front of him, we could have seen. So according to our traditional texts, when all the pervasive wind energy, what is known as the pervasive wind energy, had been withdrawn, I mean, cannot be movement in the body, the limbs, and so forth. So at that point of that stage of dying, I mean, how can that movement of body be possible? Because all the at that point, the dissolution of the 80 conceptions and then the 3, what are known as the 3 visions, have already occurred. I mean, gone before that. So the mind is something which has the characteristic of luminosity and awareness. And it is, of course, a compounded phenomena. That means it's subject to change from moment to moment. And it has its cause. One is the substantial cause, and the other is cooperative condition. So since the clear light mind has come from a compatible course, which is similar to it in type, and therefore we should be able to get a clear idea of what consciousness is at that very subtle stage to talk about past and future lives. And therefore, I tell the non-Buddhist practitioners that your belief in a independent soul is quite valuable. And Brahmanavartika Karika says that consciousness cannot arise from something which is not consciousness as its substantial cause. So Gyan Lobsang, one Mongolian monk, was very good debater and so I told him that this reason that is given in Brahmanavartika saying that when you prove past life and future lives, there's this reasoning that is used saying that because it is the awareness or mind, the similar type of its continuum has gone before it, and so I told him that this reason is too simplified, simplistic kind of a reasoning. But he said to me that it looks like that, but when you really think about it deeply, there are lots of things that you can think about in this reasoning. And then, when I have discussions with scientists, I have asked this question. Let's say that the womb of a mother is without any defect, perfect womb, and then the sperm and the ovum from the mother and the father are perfect and without any defects. So with these three things, when they come together, and when in the womb, perfect womb, when the perfect sperm and the perfect ovum come together, is it certain that conception will take place? And they said no. So that means there is a third cause for the conception to happen, and therefore the intermediate being who has died from the previous life, that the consciousness of that intermediate being to conceive in this gamete of the sperm and the ovum must happen for conception to happen. So that could be the third cause. And then there are people who remember past lives. I mean, because there is something to be remembered, they remember it, don't they? I knew two children who had remembered their past lives. One is from Patiala in Punjab, state of India, and the other was from Kanpur. So the one in Kanpur who remembered her past life actually had died from another area nearby Kanpur city, and since both the parents of the past life were still alive, when the girl remembered her past life, so because of her clear memory of the past life, the past life parents were so convinced that it was so convincing to them what she had described from her past life memory. So when you are unbiased and do analysis into these kind of things, unlike the scientists who said, which I earlier told you, it seems that is true, but it cannot be true. They're not doing like that. So we can, on the basis of these kind of facts and experiences, we can actually explain past and future lives. So karma is infallible, so that to dispel the attachment to the future lives, contemplate repeatedly the unfailing effects of karma and suffering of samsara. When through such accustomation, hope for pleasure of samsara no longer arises, even for an instant, and throughout both day and night you long for liberation, then at that time true renunciation has been born. So these verses show that the reason why we should develop renunciation and the process of developing renunciation, and then the measure of having developed true renunciation. So next is about bodhicitta. It says, yet if this renunciation is not embraced by the pure motivation of bodhicitta, it will not become a cause for the perfect bliss of unsurpassed awakening. So the wise should generate supreme bodhicitta. So with regard to bodhicitta, of course, if even animals, if they are show love and affection to one another, they will live happily. So most of the mammals cannot survive. The children cannot survive without the affection of their parents, mother, and so as I usually say that it's very important for us as social animals to have affection to one another. Although we need affection and love, the kind of love and affection that we usually have is quite tinged with attachment and biased. It is tinged with attachment, but the love or affection that we cultivate here in this context of the path to liberation, you do not say that I love this and such and such person because they are my relatives, parents and so forth, but because all of us do not want suffering but want happiness. And especially with regard to the so-called enemy, also becomes especially one's object of love and compassion, because they create causes that would bring them suffering in the future when they harm and hurt us. And therefore, this kind of love should be developed through understanding the reasons and through training one's mind. And so when we talk about love and compassion in this context, it has to be this kind of unbiased love and compassion. So on the basis of these, when we think about the suffering of others, we need to understand that the others do not also want suffering, but want happiness, and therefore to develop this all-encompassing love and affection or compassion. So, of course, at this stage, we do not have the ability or the capability to free all beings from suffering yet. When we see poor and needy people, of course, we cannot do much for them, can we? So I saw one elderly woman yesterday on a wheelchair. She had paralysis. So she told me that the one attendant with her was also an elderly man. So she told me that she cannot die, and very difficult for her. And then I told her, can you recite the 6-syllable mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum? And she said, yes. And then I told her, in that case, you are better than the birds and animals who are not able to recite that mantra. And so as long as you live, you should feel fortunate to have this human body and recite the Om Mani Padme Hum mantra as long as you live. And so there's nothing much I could do but give this kind of solace to her. So of course, even the Buddha, if the Buddha were to come in front of such a person, there's nothing the Buddha could do. Because the Buddha himself has said that the sages do not wash away the sins of sentient beings, nor do they remove their suffering with their hands, nor can they transfer their own realization into others, but only by teaching the truth and reality, they lead beings to liberation. So if the Buddhas could actually, take away the sins and suffering of other beings, then the workings of karma would all be a mess. So, in order to serve and benefit others, one should oneself have the experience of the path and accordingly be able to share with others. And so, in other words, to be practical about what you preach to others, and then you should be able to reach that of the goal of Buddhahood, which is the state where you are able to fulfill your as well as others' interests. And you should see whether this is possible or not. So, such a state where you are able to serve the benefit of others, serve the interest of others and oneself, fulfill these two goals, and you should check whether this is possible for you to attain or not as well. And so it is possible because we have the Buddha nature. So with this mind that we have, sometimes we feel angry, we have anger, whereas at other times we have compassion and love towards others. And these two states of mind are completely opposite to one another. One is thinking, wishing for others to have happiness and joy, whereas the other is actually called wishing others to have suffering. So just as the hotness and coldness cannot continue at the same place, simultaneously, likewise, the negative emotions which are rooted in ignorance, do not have a sound basis and support of knowledge, and they cannot increase infinitely through training. But on the other hand, these positive qualities of mind, such as compassion, love, and so forth, can can increase in their intensity, strength. And so the ultimate antidote to all these afflictive emotions or the mental afflictions is that of the realization of emptiness. And the mind itself is in the nature of emptiness. And therefore, this clear light nature of the mind can be twofold. One is that of the emptiness, which is the objective clear light, and then the subjective clear light mind, which is the luminous nature of the mind itself, which is taught in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Tathagata Garbha Sutra. In the Nyingma tradition and the Gyupa's Mahamudra, they talk about the Mahamudra, and Nyingmas talk about the Dzogchen, and in the Jerambuche Tsongkhapa's tradition, Jerambuche mentions that of the innate clear light nature of the mind. And they come to the same point. As Benjamin Lobsang Chögyен has said, someone who is learned in the definitive teachings and has experience of the teachings themselves, when they look at the different traditions, they actually see them to converge to the same point. So, Benjamin Lobsang Chögyen was someone who was learned in all the different traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, and therefore, it's when he says such things, it has its weight. And similarly, and Jigme Tenpe Nyima also was a great scholar of the Nyingma tradition, who has studied the Sutra tradition very well, learned in it, and then also followed the Nyingma Dzogchen tradition. And his students, such as Tugu Tsullo, and then others, who have also followed the same tradition, the non-sectarian tradition. They were really great masters. And in the Sakya tradition, also the main point that they make, or point two, is that of the innate clear light mind. When they talk about the continuum of the causal continuum of the Alaya, they actually talk about this, they refer to the clear light mind. So this has to refer to the subjective clear light mind, not the emptiness as such. A Sajja scholar, Khenpo Kunga Wangchuk, was a great scholar himself. He was following the Sajja tradition himself as his own system of thought. And then, as I age, I begin to have greater difficulty remembering names. So Khenpo Kunga Wangchuk actually was a scholar of the Nyingma tradition, and he also practiced it. And then later, in some of the Gelug scholars like Gen Pema Gyaltsen, we formed an organization, and Gen Pema Gyaltsen later used to tell me that Gen Rinchen, Khenpo Rinchen from the Sakya tradition was a great scholar. He was really able to explain certain quotations from certain classical texts very well, and so he was quite inspired. And so Khenpo Rinchen used to tell me that in the Tantric tradition, the clear light that we talk about is the subjective clear light mind, the innate clear light. And then in the Chonang tradition also, of course, the explanation of what is known as Shentong is kind of criticized by other traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. So Shentong, or the other emptiness of Chonang, can be understood to refer to the stage of what is known as the stage of all empty, clear light. As we go through the process of dying, the grosser forms of consciousness kind of dissolves into the subtler ones, and finally this all empty state is left. So it could be understood from that point of view. So since this clear light, innate clear light mind has no beginning and end, it is called in the Nyingma tradition Samandabhadra, without beginning and end. And so if we take it from the Chonang point of view, it is devoid of all other conventional states of mind at that stage. So one Chonang abbot, when I asked him whether you follow the Shentong or Rangtong, and he said they followed both. He followed both. So, through understanding emptiness, one should understand what is meant by enlightenment or changchup. And then you should have this compassion and wishing others to be free from suffering and wanting others to be to have happiness, and then you determine to reach that goal yourself in order to help others out of suffering. And so Bodhichitta, or this spirit of enlightenment, is this state of mind where you focus your mind on the full enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so the process of developing Bodhichitta is so the verse number 6 shows the reason why we should develop Bodhichitta, and then verse number 7 shows that of the process of developing it, and verse number so beings are swept along by the powerful current of the four rivers, tightly bound by the chains of their karma, so difficult to undo, ensnared within the iron trap of their self-grasping and enshrouded in the thick darkness of ignorance. Again and yet again they are reborn in limitless samsara and constantly tormented by the three forms of suffering. This is the current of condition of all my mothers, all your mothers from previous lives. Contemplate their plight and generate supreme bodhicitta. So, reflecting on the 6 types of suffering and so forth, are good to think about the nature of suffering and developing renunciation, which we covered earlier. But when you think along these lines in verse number 8, it's much more powerful to develop renunciation in a very powerful manner, in accordance with those with the beings or practitioners with sharp faculty. And so in this case, when you develop renunciation, so we are on page 69. Again and yet again they are reborn in limitless. So instead of saying they, you could switch this to I am born in limitless samsara and constantly tormented by the 3 types of suffering. And this is the current condition of myself. And therefore I contemplate this plight of myself and generate renunciation. So using this verse, we can develop renunciation as well, switching certain words to yourself instead of calling mothers and so forth. So in the world, what happens is, although people want happiness, they actually run after suffering by causing all kinds of suffering on others through and indulging in conflicts and wars and so forth out of selfishness. And so Shantideva says, though they wanted happiness, they don't want suffering, they run after suffering. But then though they want happiness, they destroy the cause of happiness as if they are their enemies. And so the ignorant destroy the cause of happiness like their enemies. And then Shantideva also goes on to say that if you do not exchange one's happiness with the suffering of others and leave alone reaching Buddhahood, even in samsara you'll not have happiness. And so these are very powerful, there's very powerful reason to what he says. And so the fact that I also think of have this intention to promote love and compassion in the world shows that I am a practitioner of bodhicitta as well. And then next on page 9, if you lack the wisdom that realizes nature of things and so forth, shows the reason why one needs to develop the wisdom of selflessness, and then the process of developing it, and then having developed the measure of having developed it comes later. So if you lack the wisdom that realizes the nature of things, although you might grow accustomed to renunciation and bodhicitta, you will be incapable of cutting through conditioned existence at its roots. Exert yourself, therefore, in the methods of realizing interdependence. And so Je Rinpoche here says, if he has said in the method of realizing selflessness, that would cover all 4 Buddhist philosophical schools. And if he has said the realizing selflessness of phenomena or emptiness, it would cover both the Chittamatra and the Madhyamaka philosophical schools. Whereas he doesn't say he doesn't use these words, but he says realizing dependent origination. So because things are dependently originated, the Madhyamakas say that things are empty of any inherent existence. In a sutra, it says that what is conditioned has no birth, it has no nature of birth and so forth. And Master Nagarjuna says what is said to be dependently originated is said to be empty, and that itself is a designation, and that is the middle way. And then he says since there's nothing which is not dependent, therefore there's nothing which is not empty. So which are very powerful reasons to establish emptiness. So Je Rinpoche, in the earlier part of his life, was sitting in a meditation on emptiness at Sangpu or Sakya Monastery, and even when the congregation was had dismissed and the prayer session has been finished, he was still sitting in meditation at next to a pillar, and that pillar was known as pillar of concentration. And then in another writing of Rinpoche, he has also given his insight, written about his insight into selflessness or emptiness. And I had once a discussion with a Mongolian master named Gen Lobsang Nyima. And I told him that when he wrote that text, he actually had, the Rinpoche had not really realized the correct view. And Gen Nyima actually was quite... and actually I quoted some lines where Rinpoche has said that the conventionalities of things must be posited from the point of view of others. And then when I mentioned that to prove my point that Rinpoche at that point had not realized selfless or emptiness fully, Gen Lobsang Nyima was not agreeing with me. And then he actually interpreted it in another way. And then I said, in that case, how do you interpret what Gungtang Tempe Döme had said, that Rinpoche had not, at that point, not completed his search on emptiness. And then Gen Nyima also kept quiet. The knowledge that appearances arise unfailingly, independence, and knowledge that they are empty and beyond all assertions, as long as these two appear to you as separate, there can be no realization of Buddha's wisdom. So, what this shows is that when you are not able to actually complement this understanding that there is appearance yet they are empty, while you say the appearance is there, you're not able to assert their emptiness. I mean, that shows that you have not yet realized the Buddha's intent. Whereas on page number 71, so whether it's internal phenomena, the experiences, perception, and so forth, or the external objects, not if when you are not able to say this is it and pinpoint the things and the perception and so forth. I mean, what this shows is that there's nothing that can be found when you do search for their identities, and therefore what we are left with is to say that things are merely conventional, nominal. So in Madhyamaka Avatara, it says that when you do analysis of a chariot, for example, in the sevenfold, through the sevenfold reasoning, nothing can be pinpointed as being the chariot. And similarly, it is the case with the person, a person. So the assertion of Alaya Vijnana as the identity of an individual is posited by the Chittamatras, since they actually assert that things have some objective existence in themselves. Yet when you actually put this kind of assertion under the lens of Madhyamaka reasoning, nothing whatever can be held as being the person within the psychophysical aggregates. and therefore things would be seen as merely convention, merely designated. And so when you reach that kind of realization, it says, yet when they arise at once, not each in turn but both together, then through merely seeing unfailing dependent origination, certainty is born, and all modes of misapprehension fall apart. That is when discernment of the view has reached perfection. When you know that appearance dispels the extreme of existence. So of course things do appear to us as being this and that, but if you say that that thing exists within it, in and of itself, you must be able to find it within it, but that's not possible. While the extreme of nothingness is eliminated by emptiness. And so the view of emptiness actually eliminates this nihilism. And you also come to know that how emptiness arises, cause and effected, when you are able to actually understand how the emptiness and dependent origination actually complement each other. This realization happens. Then you will be immune to any view entailing clinging to extremes. When in this way you have correctly understood the points of the three principal aspects of the path, withdraw to solitude, dear son, seek solitude, my son, and swiftly accomplish the ultimate and lasting aim. So, in that case, did the first Dalai Lama, Gyendun Drup, not actually pay heed to this advice? So he had said that in order to benefit the Dharma and sentient beings more, I actually forsook the staying in solitude in the retreat called Gangchen hill. So similarly, I also think like that of the first Dalai Lama. So all of us do recite the 6 sessions of Guru Yoga, and we dedicate our wholesome karma created over the 3 times, and we dedicate our body, speech and mind for the benefit of others. So I do think along these lines and dedicate my body, speech and mind and resources and so forth for the benefit of others. And that too, as Shantideva says, as long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain, may I too abide to dispel the suffering of the transmigrators. And so here, the Rinpoche calls Saku Ombongawan Thakpa, to whom this letter was addressed, as my son. And so directly, but indirectly, he's referring to all of us as his children. Strengthen your diligence and swiftly accomplish the ultimate and lasting goal. So with regard to exchanging of self and others, equaling exchanging self and others, so there's no difference between oneself and others in not wanting even the slightest suffering, but not being contented with the whatever happiness and joy we have. So with regards to equaling of oneself and others, here it is the reason is that all of us are equally not wanting suffering but wanting happiness. So in that sense, the sense of equanimity is developed based on that kind of understanding. So with regard to equaling of oneself and others, there is a method of doing that. 6 ways on conventional terms and 3 from the ultimate point of view. So in relation to oneself, one survives because of others. Whatever good things in samsara we are dependent on others as well. And so that is meant by relating to oneself, that you are equal and you and others are equal. If you have actually become fully enlightened without any faults, but complete with all the excellent qualities, you may be able to see yourself as something special from others, different from others. But we are also subject to moment by moment change moment by moment, and others too are like that, and we also suffer because of that. And so in that sense we are equal, and there's no way we can think of others as being lower to oneself. As I quoted earlier, Shantideva's lines, though they want to avoid suffering, they run after suffering. And though they want happiness, they destroy the cause of happiness. The ignorant ones destroy the cause of happiness as if they are the enemies. And so the sentient beings have been kind to oneself, beneficial to oneself in the past, as well as now they are being. And you should also think of the nature of suffering that we and others are in, and that we are equal in that sense. And all sentient beings are equal in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. For example, if you meet some patients, sick people, people who are sick, ill, you cannot actually discriminate some to be closer to you and others to be more distant from you. There's no way you can do that, because they are all suffering from sickness. And similarly, if you have about 10 beggars who come to you to beg for food and clothes and so forth, they are all beggars equally, that they are impoverished and all destitute. And so you developed equanimity from the point of yourself as well as others. And then you need to think about the kindness of other sentient beings. For your life, in this life, the pleasures and the good experiences that you have is thanks to other sentient beings. And also, higher rebirth that you may attain in the next life is because of or thanks to the sentient beings. And then the liberation that you seek also is due to the kindness of sentient beings, because with regard to the liberation, it is attained through the 3 trainings of wisdom, which is based on concentration, and which in turn is based on a discipline, and for which we actually practice discipline or ethics in relation to other sentient beings. So the practice of avoiding or overcoming the three physical unwholesome actions, the 4 verbal ones and 3 mental ones, all are done in relation to others. And so, whether it's temporary goal or the ultimate goal of liberation, I mean, it's all of these are done in relation to others, and therefore you cannot neglect and ignore other sentient beings in pursuing the goal of higher rebirths and liberation and so forth. And therefore it is foolish to ignore and be indifferent to the suffering and happiness of other sentient beings. So if you see animals going off the cliff, some cliff, you would actually feel sorry for them, saying that, these sentient beings, these animals are actually jumping off the cliff, risking their lives out of ignorance. And similarly, for us human beings too, we could actually, when they suffer, we should feel sorry for them, how bad that they are suffering and so forth. And then with regard to developing this kind of attitude from the ultimate point of view, the Buddhas see that of those of the mental afflictions as the enemy and not the being who is afflicted. So the Buddhas do not consider other beings as the enemies of the Dharma and evil, totally evil, malevolent beings and so forth. So because of their negative emotions, anger, hatred and so forth, the sentient beings cause themselves suffering, and therefore one should actually develop this equanimity of oneself and others. Understanding that all of us want happiness and that they do not want suffering. As I quoted earlier from Lama Chepa. And then the chronic disease is something which is difficult to cure. So we have the self-cherishing attitude since time beginningless, and we want happiness for oneself. But it's a very narrow-minded state of, wish or that you have. Although you cherish yourself, but you are foolishly cherishing yourself when you are totally narrow-minded. So this chronic disease of self-cherishing attitude is the source of all our suffering, unwanted suffering. And so developing this attitude of cherishing others over oneself, for that there is no greater text than Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life. So anger disturbs our mind, and to combat the anger or hatred within ourselves, the 6th chapter of the Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life is very powerful, has very powerful reasonings to help eliminate this kind of anger. And then for developing the Bodhichitta based on equaling and exchanging self and others, there is no greater text than Bodhisattva Charya Avatara by Shantideva, especially the 8th chapter, number 8, which teaches through various reasons the reasons why we should avoid or overcome self-cherishing attitude and develop cherishing others over oneself. So you'll see, if you read this chapter well, thoroughly, this self-cherishing attitude has actually caused ruin to oneself in the past and is causing ruin to oneself in now and will do so in the future. And therefore, you actually begrudge this self-cherishing attitude and try to combat it. And then, with regard to cherishing others, even if others, sentient beings, were to arise as your enemies, you will consider them as your dear mothers, and then develop the self-cherishing others. In the 6th chapter of Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, it is said that since there is an enemy or an adversary who provokes anger in you, that person is actually giving you the opportunity to practice patience and tolerance, and therefore that person, the provocator, should be seen as your spiritual teacher. So we do keep the monastic vows which are laid in the Vinaya text, the code of discipline for the monks. Of course, on the basis of these practice, we may be able to practice some patience, but mainly in relation to someone who provokes anger, and you will be able to practice patience, not in relation to the Buddha or your relatives and near and dear ones. So the adversaries, your adversaries or enemies, are the objects of your anger, and therefore they give you the opportunity to practice patience, and therefore they should be looked at as, seen as your spiritual, virtuous friend. And so the 6th chapter on patience and the 8th chapter of the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, which teaches that of which is the chapter on meditation or concentration. It would be good for you to study these two chapters whenever you can. So it is not only for the Buddhists to practice these self-cherishing, overcoming self-cherishing and cherishing others over oneself, and are needed even for Muslims and Christians and so forth. So when you feel angry and full of selfishness, what happens is people say, oh, that person is really selfish, and avoid you, and then you remain alone. So it's quite late now. And then the summary of the verses that were recited before. So this verse which says self-cherishing attitude is the doorway to all one's degeneration, and the cherishing others over oneself is the source of all goodness, good qualities. And therefore, may I be blessed to exchange oneself and others, and then Benchen Losang Chogyam wrote, "Therefore, my kind Guru, please bless me to so that I may take the suffering and the evil, the negativities of others into myself, and give all the virtues of myself to others." So what you do here in exchanging oneself with others is take the negativities of others, all the other mother sentient beings, and my own good and the positive karmas and happiness I give to others. Whatever wholesome actions I have done with my three doors, body, speech and mind, I sincerely dedicate it for others and give them to others. And so Master Nagarjuna says, not this kind of practice of giving and taking is not done just once, but until the end of space. And he also says that until, as long as there is even a few sentient beings not enlightened somewhere, may I remain for their sake to lead them to enlightenment. And so, Bodhisattva Charyavat, our guide to the Bodhisattva way of life, in the first chapter, which is about the benefits of Bodhichitta, this altruistic spirit of enlightenment, is the source of all good for oneself and others. It is like the sun which dispels the darkness of ignorance in others. It is like the churning of the butter from the milk of the ocean of dharma, and it is like the sun, the moonlight which soothes the travelers on the fatigued on the path of samsara. And apart from thinking about bodhicitta, if you do any kind of protective, visualize protection wheels around you, while you keep your self-cherishing attitude deep within yourself, solidly, it doesn't really help. And instead of that, if you actually keep this kind of selfishness, self-cherishing attitude within yourself, even when you do this kind of tantric practice and so forth, you will not be able to actually help oneself and others. In fact, you are strengthening the self-cherishing attitude. And when you say, may these be eliminated, overcome, and so forth, by clapping your hand when you recite the mantra of the Heart Sutra, you should actually clap your hand to shoo away the self-cherishing attitude and that of the grasping at true independent existence of oneself and other things. And so the protection wheels and so forth that are taught in the highest Yoga Tantra are meant for very specific disciples for whom the highest Yoga Tantric teachings are tailored, and you cannot generalize such teachings when it comes to the general practice of the Dharma. And so I feel happy when I do the Yamantaka prayer of making the Dharma offering, the 64-part Dharma offering and so forth. I actually summon these the so-called evil beings and tell them that what I do is try to help and serve sentient beings, and whatever I do is also for you too, to help you, to benefit you, and therefore you should also not harm others but do good to others. So when we lost our country, nothing really helped. All these tantric big rituals, which are supposed to avert the negative beings and so forth, nothing really helped us. We all became our own masters. We had to take care of ourselves, didn't we? So the Ladakhis, of course, you didn't lose your country. You lived very happily. But what I'm trying to say is I'm using giving reasons from different angles to see the negativity or shortcomings of self-cherishing attitude and the benefit of cherishing others over oneself. So, of course, again, I wanted to say something about the people going into trance who are possessed by some deities. So there are deities like Machen Pomra and Nyenchen Tangla and so forth, whom I meet. So these deities were indigenous Tibetan deities, and so I told them that we should all work together, the deities and us Tibetan people. So some of these oracle mediums, someone told me that in the past he used to have a dream where somebody wearing a metal hat came to him and told him that I really have to give lesson to the Dalai Lama, overcome or give lesson to him. And then later on he had a dream where the same person came and told him, oh, now I have become friends with the Dalai Lama. So I thought that this may be because of the meditation and cultivation of Bodhichitta, with which I consider all beings as my friends and guests for the feast of enlightenment. So these also help others, people, and also the so-called evil beings benefit. So they also do not want suffering but want happiness, like us. So just because of their certain negative actions, we cannot just do all kinds of practices to overcome them, considering saying that, oh, these are our enemies and these are evil forces. And so, thinking along this line from the Guide to a Bodhisattva Way of Life, today I've called, in front of all the Buddhas, the Tathagatas, I've called you as my guests to the feast of the Tathagata, or enlightenment. And therefore, the gods and demigods be delighted. So Bodhichitta is that tree which gives the cool shade to the beings, the travelers on the path to samsara, And so with this kind of negative circumstances, when you meet with them, I mean, you can actually, with the help of this bodhicitta, you can turn them into positive positivity. And so Gaden Tissur Rinpoche had requested me to give this bodhicitta, which is in the restricted manner called the sealed or concealed bodhicitta. So the text is given here, and so Tijan Rinpoche gave me this teaching on this restricted sealed bodhicitta practice, and told me that once you have received teaching on it, you should practice it on a daily basis. And so you should also do the same. Wow. So His Holiness is going over the same topic, looking at all sentient beings as being equal, and from the point of view of being impermanent and not wanting suffering but wanting happiness, and then from your own point of view that you see others as equal to yourself, and the so-called adversaries or enemies and friends are relative. Of course, we are not saying that there are no enemies as such, but the fact that we call someone enemies or adversaries has to do with our own misperception of others being independently existing. And therefore, you counter that with the realization of... And then, for cultivating this kind of bodhicitta, the text called the second volume of... on the stages of meditation by Kamalashila is very powerful. So there was some contention from the Chinese meditation teachers saying that mere thoughtlessness meditation is enough to reach enlightenment. Why the need for analytical and investigative meditation? And even today, some Japanese also asked me then why the need for this kind of critical analysis into the nature of things. So when your mind is channelized well through the development of concentration, single-pointed concentration, then you actually develop a powerful mind which can focus very accurately on the reality of how things are. And so, not only doing away with just distraction and mental laxity, but to realize the ultimate nature of the mind and the phenomena is, for that, this text is very good. Kamalashila's middle volume of the stages of meditation. Now, it's already 11:30. But I had a talk with Gaden Tissur Rinpoche, Rizong Rinpoche. So the second Dalai Lama Gendun Gyatso has written a commentary on Manjushri Nama Sangiti, which is to say the chanting the names of Manjushri or something like that. And the second Dalai Lama Gendun Gyatso has written his commentary, and this commentary, the transmission of the text was not amongst the Gelugpa scholars or masters, but I received it from a Nyingma master, Digu Khyentse Rinpoche, from who actually had received it from Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo, and with regards to so with regard to this kind of commentarial transmission of on the Manjushri Nama Sangiti, I find it quite rare, because Ken Rinpoche Kunga Wangchuk of Sakya tradition, once when I asked him if he had received the transmission of the explanation, he told me he hadn't before, but in one time in Bodh Gaya, Your Holiness gave a transmission of the reading of this Manjushri Nama Sangiti, and told to the audience that this also serves as a commentarial transmission of the Manjushri Nama Sangiti. And sorry, I don't have the English text with me. I didn't expect this would be covered today. It's in my computer, not with me now. So His Holiness is just going to give a reading transmission, basically. The text begins by saying in the Indian language, Arya Manjushri Nama Sangiti, and in the Tibetan language, the translation of this is given as Papa Jambeki Sanyanta Chepa, and then there is the line of homage written by the translator, which says homage to the youthful Manjushri, and then the text begins by saying Artha, or in Tibetan Tene, and this same text can be interpreted according to the Kriya Tantra or the highest Yoga Tantra, and within the highest Yoga Tantra, the Mother Tantra or Father Tantra, or the non-dual Tantra as it's called, and so forth. So Vajrapani is requesting the Buddha to give the teaching on this Manjushri Nama Sangiti. So there are 6 chapters to this text. So having requested the Buddha to give the teaching, the Buddha says, with compassion, you have requested this teaching on Manjushri, which is who is of the wisdom body. So wisdom body here refers to the illusory body in the highest Yoga Tantra. So it arises from the subtle wind energy, which is together with, inseparable from that of the clear light, innate clear light mind. So Buddha says it is very good that in order to help sentient beings, you have requested this teaching on the Manjushri Namasangiti from me, and you want to listen to it. And then Vajrapani says, puts his hands together and says, well done. The Buddha says, Vajrapani, very good, I will teach you this text, give this teaching. So for the school children, it is very important for you to recite the Manjushri mantra, Arapata Nadi. So I have done that in my childhood. And so the parents should recite the Arapata Nadi so that the children get used to this mantra and that they could also recite it themselves when they are able to speak. So the text goes through some mantra, A, and so forth, and then Arapasana Yati Nama, and then it goes through, it says, the Buddha, Bhagavans, arise, the perfectly enlightened ones arise from this letter A. And A is the supreme of all the syllables, and it is meaningful, a noble and meaningful letter. And it's birthless, and it cannot be expressed in words, and so forth. So the text goes through the 10 perfections, perfection of charity, perfection of morality, perfection of patience, perfection of diligence, perfection of concentration, and perfection of wisdom. So, and then the other paramitas or perfections are the perfection of power, aspiration, method or skillful means, and then that of primordial wisdom, exalted wisdom. And then it goes through what are known as the 5 Buddha bodies, such as the emanation body, the Sambhogakaya, complete enjoyment body, and then there is also the mention of what is known as spontaneously arisen or co-emergent body. And so these are referred by certain lines in this text.
7년보다 더 버전에서 뭐 7년도 버전은 뭐를 계속 내주 나가는 거죠. 정말 전부 좀 결혼 자주 사고서 레저도 모두 더 예배는 새로 예배냐 뭐 무슨 거다냐 강물데 대신지대 집에서 더 그러면서 가는지 대번이지 소라는 대번이사디
So here there's mention of two truths. There are two truths from the point of view of the general structure of the teaching of the Buddha, which is common to both Tantra and Sutra, and then there is the two truths from the point of view of the highest Yoga Tantra point of view as well. So he's only saying these lines which say the progenitor of all the Buddhas and the son of the supreme son of the Buddhas and so forth, similar to some lines in Yamantaka Sadhana, where it says the all-pervasive, non-dual body and so forth. So from this line which begins with Doji Jigje Jigpache, which means Vajra Bhairava, who is terrifying, it shows that of the wisdom of mirror-like wisdom. And then next, the lines which begin with Yangda Tangme Tishingi, which means the perfect selflessness, the suchness, or the reality, shows that of the discriminative wisdom.
Demi today de chumame yeba ba jen ba shi de ba se ba kushi kure da ba ba na ba de shin de shin yi cui sha na ba dong de tuje de mo du sa je de je ba sa je tong tong me ta bo sun de je ma ba yi xin mi xi de ma yi xin de je de ce种ma ji ma de je ma de ba shuo de na ma de de zu guo me gu de ba shuo de ba si ji chong de na do zang ba ba je ba wo la na ba da na ba na ba shi de go de su mu ji ba那么的这边现在都这个啥什么都记得，所以说我本来就或者今年或者什么说到那个台的，我吃一个的工作，当然是我这边上到一些年，我现在本来我可以让我叫到什么是叫弄商业公益是什么商业公益，商业公益那是什么商业公益，但把这个做起来就我这些管道我什么之前我就估计我做些什么估计什么商业公益。吐不起我商业公益，吐了那个商业公益，不起我商业公益，所以你们都是你们拿这个的，我真是。차제로서 차고 제 가장 로서 뭐 도시기로 산제로 산제로 저 뭐빠다 선이 봐만 이 꾸리 이제 뭐 개부시 뭐 개부 주주 나서 뭐 처음에 제가 상 도시 넘버 지시 이거 저는 뭐 태고 친구도 저 수지 뭐 도시 뭐 도시 서무저는 제 도시로 도시가 벌써 뭐 그래서 뭐 상황 분위기 되는데 나보다 뭐 다음에 좀 연다 이제 나서 상설지 주주 저거는 주주 다 보죠 도시 이제 도시 때문에 뭐 이시구나 뭐죠. 군도상 뭐로르다. 군도상 뭐로르상. 사이니 군도 저는 저 사지 근육이 뭐니 뭐지면 좀 그런 저 뭔가 먹고 내려서 저 뭔가 먹고 내려서 이렇게 지금 뭐 예전 싫어 좀 그저로 저 뭐도 저 봐서 지금 뭐도 뭐 도보로 저 저도 미루거든. 저것은 신주 뭐 창사에 그 영어로 이시 매제 그래서 저는 님이 이시 deve tendom deve tendom tabat benge so de nam jo mo so je kunje so so de ram jo
So the line which begins with the flame of the wisdom clearly it's a blades and so forth shows that of the equal wisdom of equality.
산지 주변에 계란다 되면 감겨 근겨 와서 저거부터 좀 이제 저거 되지 저주에 남아서 지신셰베 연어서 원하는 게 계수 지금도 상에 남제고 선제 그런 샤실 차 너무도 보자고 선제 군지 이런 적 선제 군지 이런 적 선제 군지 원도 시도 선제 군지 이도 후모가 되니 시 나도 후모가 상황이 좀 군지 다는 야마지고 그러는 게 없는 게 뭐죠 그래도 야라 준이 시즈던 다원나버 준이 제가 대신 주에 나뭐 좀 싫어 시험제고 또 뭐죠 되는 나버 준이 되면 되는 거 주로서 나버 주셔 나버 산게 그래서 산제 군지 주변고 저음에 되고 그래서 뭐 수익이 되는 태권도서 저기는 뭐 또뭐 태고 수익 내주는 태고지기 되면 용감나 다음에 뭐는 저거는 초도서 그러면 저요 뭐래 저 님분이 그냥 뭐 받아줘 봤네 니지 뭐 싫어도 되려고 되는 뭐 도시군이 되는 방식만 너는 되는 거 가지고 수직 그 유료한데 유료한데 수직군이 이제 뭐 수직군이 이라는 거 뭐 무슨 군이 생각을 수직군이 이해가 뭐 두고 터지 주면 나머지 뭐 좀 타소네 뭐 근데 연대 숨게도 부모가 되는 거 이제 사실 기지 지기 소산계 산계 근에 라신 좀 류게 쳐 류게 타네 또뭐 수능 나서 근도 너무 쳐버리지 또 자, 팀에제 자원 낸는지 이시
So from what is to be realized by all the Buddhas from this line down,
something
it shows that of the emphasizing the accomplishment of all the activities. And then the fifth chapter is said to be the one which is praising the Buddhas, the five Buddha families, from on the basis of the five wisdoms. And then after these mantras, beginning with Om Sarva Dharma Svabhava and so forth, and then with Dharmata tu Jnana Garbha A, next comes the chapter of rejoicing in the teaching. This profound and vast teaching of the Buddhas are taught by the fully enlightened ones. So with this I have given you, it could be taken as receiving some kind of explanation, commentary on the Manjushri Namasangiti, and tomorrow we'll have the long life initiation and then offering of long life puja for His Holiness. So we'll start at 9 o'clock. Through this merit or wholesome practice, may all sentient beings complete the accumulation of merit and wisdom through which whereby they accomplish or attain the two Buddha bodies. And then the dedication verse. This is a dedication lines from the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment by Tsongkhapa. So the prayer begins with, from my two collections, vast space that I have amassed from working with effort at this practice for a great length of time, may I become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds' wisdom eye is blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, may I be held in your loving compassion for all lives. Manjushri, may I find the best of complete graded paths of the teachings, and may I please all the Buddhas by my practice, and so forth. And then it ends with this, whenever someone makes effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Maya and virtuous practices, may he always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may oceans of prosperity spread everywhere. This is a prayer of the words of truth written by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, with a homage to the three jewels, Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, and then the calling on the great masters of the past and so forth, and then saying, in short, may the good fruits of any extensive prayer to fully protect the land of snows, Tibet, made by the powerful protector Chandrasik, Avalokiteshvara, in the presence of the Buddhas and their children, appear soon here and now.